Hello and welcome back. Well, it's the end of 2025 and we've had some further updates on some of the major software brands, but also concerningly we've also had some fairly substantial price increases between some of the major players. And in the next few videos we're going to take a look at what the packages now cost, how they perform, and to see if there are some better options around. And firstly we're going to take a look at my old favourite Denoise and sharpening software. And we'll be comparing the latest update in Lightroom. We'll be looking at DxO Labs Pure Raw, the new version, and we'll also look at Topaz Labs Photo. Now, it used to be called Photo AI, now it's just called Photo, and it's been included in a package of software called Studio, which used to be the name of an artistic group of filters that Topaz marketed some years ago, so the whole thing's become a little bit confusing. But hopefully we can clarify some of these things, so let's jump in and take a look. So before we jump in and look at some examples, I thought it would be sensible to have a look at the different packages we're going to look at, their pros and cons, and the pricing structure as of the end of 2025, as best I can work it out, because some of the websites are a little bit confusing and there are various discounts and things happening. So we're going to look at obviously Adobe Lightroom Classic and Camera Raw that come as part of your Creative Cloud subscription. We're going to look at Topaz Photo, which used to be called Photo AI, and which has now been morphed into a package called Topaz Studio, which includes some other packages that really are of probably limited value for photographers, but does include gigapixel. And that's now as a package called Topaz Studio, which used to be the name of a series of artistic or painterly like plugins that Topaz marketed a few years ago. So it's a little bit confusing, but it's now Topaz Photo. And lastly, we're going to have a look at DxO Labs Pure Raw version 5, which is relatively new and which is an upgrade on the previous version 4. So let's take a look at the packages individually. Now obviously Lightroom Classic and Camera Raw come as part of your Creative Cloud subscription. You don't have an option. So what they've done is they've increased the cost of the plan, and if you're on the basic plan, the 20 gigabyte plan, by all means do not cancel that subscription, because if you want to then resubscribe, your only option is going to be the 1 terabyte cloud storage plan, and that's gone up quite massively, up to 372 Australian dollars per year. And if you're on the old 20 gig plan, the cost rose earlier this year to $192 per year, which was around about a 12% increase. So in dollar terms, not a massive amount, but still a 12% increase is quite a lot, and if you're on a limited budget, that can be a consideration. So let's look at the pros and cons of Adobe and Camera Raw. Well, some of the pros are pretty self-evident. Obviously, you don't have to pay anything more for when we're talking about the denoising and sharpening options. Adobe's versions come built into Lightroom and Photoshop as part of Camera Raw, so you don't have to pay anything more. And of course it works well with the catalog system and the processing through Lightroom, and Lightroom's catalog system is still by far the best in the business. So if you do nothing else, work with Lightroom and use the catalog, it is the best management software there is. And of course they have over the last year or so improved the masking in Lightroom and Camera Raw. Although if you are looking at some fairly critical masking situations, you will get better results working in Photoshop. Some people will argue the contrary, but actually when you're working with an image in Photoshop, you can really precisely add and subtract little bits of masking. But broadly speaking, the masking in Lightroom is much improved over previous versions. But of course there are some downsides. Well, firstly, you've had a pretty steep increase, and if you're a new user, I think that price of entry is a little bit too high, and I asked the question, do you really need 1 terabyte of online storage? I don't use any online storage. All my storage is here. Some people swear by online storage or cloud storage, others swear at it. So you need to think about that for yourself. But the 20 gigabyte plan is more than adequate for most people, I would say. And of course, secondly, when we're looking at the denoise and sharpening in particular in Lightroom, it's been much improved over previous versions, and as if you've watched my previous videos, you will know that it was pretty terrible. It's much improved, but it's not the best there is. And if you try to use the super resolution option, it's pretty well useless. It is nowhere near. Well, it's not even in the same universe as gigapixel for upscaling images. And you can't use that in conjunction with denoising. So you've got the option there, if you have a low-res image, let's say that was scanned from a slide or came from somewhere like that, that you wanted to get rid of the noise and the artifacts in it, but also upscale it, you can only do one or the other. You can't do both. So that's a little bit of a downside. And being a slight aside from particularly the denoise and sharpening, is you've got these AI features in generative fill and generative remove. Works pretty well most of the time, but occasionally throws in some really strange and unexpected results. So yes, if you're subscribing to Creative Cloud and you're happy with what it does, then you probably don't need to watch any further, because you're not concerned about looking at a better system. So let's have a look at Topaz Photo AI, which is now Photo, and the terminology is confusing, and I've had a lot of trouble trying to get into the accounts page on Topaz Labs. For some unknown reason, it was really difficult to get into, and they've morphed it into a new package called Studio. So if you have a current subscription for Photo AI, which is the present version, that subscription will expire on the anniversary of whenever you took out the subscription. You will still own the software, and you can still use it, of course, but there will be no further updates. So what you've got is what you're going to get. But if you want to renew your subscription, it will then morph into this Photo, which will come as part of the cost for Studio. So if you're a current user, you can swap over to the Studio package, and it now is $138 Australian per year subscription price. But if you're a new subscriber and you want to take out the package on its own, you don't really get that option. You're looking at nearly $400 per year. So if you're not already using any of the Topaz software, there's a pretty steep entry price for getting into it, and I think for some people that will be a bridge too far. And when you do get the Studio package, you get several different pieces of software. You've got the Photo, you've got the video noise reduction package, you get Gigapixel, you get Bloom, Astra and Mosaic, which are quite honestly packages I'm probably unlikely to use, but you may find them useful. So for me, if I was a new user, I would find that $396 a year is going to be too much. And so let's have a look at the pros and cons of Topaz. Well, obviously it's a pretty good denoise and sharpening package, but as we'll see in my examples that we're going to come to, it's no longer the best there is. But on the plus side, the super focus option can really help for images where there's a slightly out of focus area. Obviously, if it's way out of focus, there's not a lot you can do, but slightly out of focus areas can be recovered using that super focus. It does take a little bit of a while to process, and uses up some of the credits you get with your subscription, but it can be a lifesaver in some cases. So as far as cons are concerned, well, the big thing is the price increase, and especially for new users, as I've mentioned. And even though it's still pretty good, it's not the best there is. And sometimes you get some odd artifacts when you're looking at areas of small texture and background areas, can leave some odd artifacts. And finally, coming to DxO Labs Pure Raw, which I've used a couple of previous versions. I found it a very good package at the time. With the older version, I didn't think it was as good as Topaz, but now we have version 5. And it's available as an upgrade. If you have an earlier version, you can upgrade for as little as $74, which I think is Australian dollars quoted on the website. Or if you want to buy it outright new, it's $129.99. Call it $130. So it's a pretty inexpensive package. And of course, with DxO products, you pay once and you own it, so there's no subscription required. And for full disclosure purposes, DxO have provided me a free version of Pure Raw for review and comment, and have offered our Photo Tutor YouTube viewers a discount with a code which will be revealed at the end of the video. However, I made it clear to them at the time I was happy for them to provide me the package for evaluation on the basis that I give my honest opinion. And in this case, when you look at this video, you can make your own decision on which you prefer, based not only on the performance of the packages that we're looking at, but also the cost. So now let's look at some actual images where we've tried out these different techniques and we can do a bit of a comparison. All of these photographs were taken on a recent trip to Japan where we had no tripods. We were traveling pretty lightly, and so everything was handheld, and so in some cases we've had to shoot at higher ISOs in order to get a sharp image. This particular photograph of these sake barrels outside a temple in Tokyo was taken at 4500 ISO. So let's zoom in to 100% to have a look at two options here. And we're looking at the same image side by side. The one on the right has been processed in Lightroom but without the denoise and sharpening applied. And the one on the left here is the same version but with Lightroom's denoise and sharpening applied. And you can see it's made a pretty good job of getting rid of the noise, particularly in the shadow areas here. It's done a pretty good job. The detail here is maybe a little bit smeary, but you can see what was originally there. So certainly Lightroom's denoise and sharpening does a pretty good job, but could it be better? Let's have a look at a comparison now. So let's move on to the version using Topaz Photo, and we'll have a look here. Topaz Photo on the left and Lightroom on the right. And of course I think what I've done is I've picked up the version of Lightroom without the denoise applied, so that wouldn't be fair. So okay, on the right we now have the Lightroom version with denoise applied, and on the left we have the version with Topaz Photo, and you can see that actually Lightroom's done a little bit of a better job here. There's a little bit more texture and detail kept in the surface here, whereas Lightroom has maybe smeared it out a little bit too much, but it's not a bad comparison. So let's move on to an example using the DxO Deep Prime, and we'll have a look at that as a comparison with the original camera raw version. So now we've got here, and Lightroom loves to swap things around on you, so you've got to be kept guessing all the time. We'll keep the Lightroom version on the right hand side. So that's Lightroom's denoise and sharpening, and on the left we now have the DxO version. And there's not a lot in it, but the DxO version has actually brought back a little more detail and sharpness in these shadow areas. In the other areas of the image, there's not a lot of difference, but certainly when it comes down to these darker areas of the image, the DxO Pure Raw seems to do a slightly better job. And you can do a few other tests, and you can use different settings, but basically what I found was that overall DxO did a better job than either Camera Raw or Topaz Photo. So in this instance, DxO did a slightly better job. So moving on to another example, taken at the same shrine in Tokyo, and continuing the theme, we have a collection of sake bottles put in as offerings at the temple. Now, again, we've got the processed image on the right, but without denoising applied, and you can see if I zoom in here, you can see in the background areas quite a lot of grainy noise. This one was 4000 ISO, so fairly similar to the previous one, and this one on the left is using camera raws, denoise and sharpening. See, it's done a pretty good job here. It's retained a fair bit of detail, and it looks pretty good. And no matter where you go, if we look in the darker areas, you can certainly see when we get into the darker areas the noise gets fairly strong, but camera raw has done a pretty good job. So let's again do a comparison and see how it looks with Topaz Photo. So we'll just have to get rid of the wrong one, and we'll again swap them over because Lightroom loves to do that to fool us. And so on the left hand side we have the version using Topaz Photo, and you can see it's done a pretty good job of getting rid of the noise, but we're starting to see some artifacts appear in these shadowy areas, whereas Lightroom has done a better job. There's not much in it between the sharpness of the image. They're both looking pretty good, but that noise that Topaz has left in there is probably not really acceptable. So let's move on again, and well, I used a stronger version of Topaz Photo to do a further comparison, and this is the stronger version. No, it's not. I see Lightroom's done it again. Likes to swap them around on me. So on the left hand side we have the Topaz Photo, but using the strong denoise setting, it's cleared up those artifacts in the shadow area and given us a pretty similar result. It might be marginally better than camera raw, but there's not a lot in it. So depending on the settings you use, you just need to be careful when you're trying these things out. But let's do the comparison with DxO Pure Raw, and again we'll compare it with the camera raw version, because at the end of the day, if you're going to spend money on buying a plugin, you've got to compare it to the one you get built into the price with Lightroom. So we'll swap those around, and again of course Lightroom has done the swap on me. Let's go back and we'll zoom into these shadow areas. So now we have on the left DxO's Deep Prime, and on the right camera raw. Not a huge amount in it. It's pretty similar. I'd say that there's not a lot of difference between the two. They're both very good. They've gotten rid of all the noise in those shadowy areas. They've retained detail in these highlight areas, and the sharpness is pretty good. So there's really very little difference between the two in this instance. So certainly as it comes out of the box, the DxO Pure Raw works really well. Topaz Photo, we need to tweak it a little bit more to get a similar result. So in this case, fairly line ball, but I think DxO is as good as the rest of them, maybe slightly better. So let's now look at another example. Okay, for this other example, we're looking at a street scene recorded at 6400 ISO. It was getting pretty late in the day and it was fairly dull and overcast, so let's have a look at the detail. Again, we're looking at the processed raw file and comparing the one with camera raw's denoise and sharpening applied and the one without. And you can see the one without, quite a lot of noise, particularly in the darker areas, and I'm going to concentrate on these darker areas to just show the comparison of the different versions. Now that's the raw file without any denoise and sharpening. This is using camera raw's denoise and sharpening, so it's certainly made a big difference here. But I also looked at this little pot plant here in the foreground. You can see that the camera raw denoise and sharpening has certainly smoothed out a lot of the really gnarly texture in the plant and in the foreground here. Again, we're talking about fairly dark parts of the image, so they're the bits we're going to compare. So again, let's move on and look at the Topaz Photo, and again I've used the strong version of Denoise in this instance because it was 6400 ISO. There's no point in fooling around with the standard version. We want to go to the strong version, and I have to make sure I get the right version. And again, of course, Lightroom likes to swap them around, so we're going to go back and look at this version. This is on the right hand side is the version with Lightroom's Denoise, and on the left it's with Topaz Photo, Denoise and Sharpen. And I think in the instance of the plants it's maybe done a marginally better job, but I noticed here in the texture of the paving, Topaz has gone a bit crazy and introduced a lot of fairly nasty textural artifacts, whereas the Camera Raw version has left that pretty much alone, and so that's starting to look a little bit unacceptable. Let's look at that little spot in the corner here. It was in shadow, the little sign on the door. Lightroom's version here, the Topaz version here. Not a big difference between the two. Maybe Topaz marginally more detail here, but certainly this issue with the noise and the graininess in the foreground is really not going to be acceptable. So let's now look at the DxO version. Let's make sure we introduce the correct version here. So again, Lightroom likes to swap them around on us, so let's just go back to where we were. On the right is the Camera Raw version. Let's zoom in on this little pot plant, and on the left we have the DxO version, and I think I can clearly see that in this instance the DxO version gives a little bit more detail, but we've also avoided that gnarly sort of grainy artifacts in the paving. It's brought out some detail, but it hasn't gone overboard. And even if we look at this little group of ferns in the bottom corner of the image, it's on the left is the Deep Prime version, DxO, and on the right is Lightroom, and certainly DxO has done a better job. Let's have a look at that little sign in the doorway. Yes, certainly in this case you can see clearly that the DxO version has got cleaner details in these timber panels. It's brought a little bit more out of here. The Lightroom version not quite as good. And then if I even look at some of these timber slats on the right hand side of the picture, the DxO version on the left has managed to get rid of a little bit more noise and bring out just a little bit more detail, and particularly here with the timber grain here and these panels, it just seems to have gotten a little bit better overall than the Lightroom version. So in this instance, where I see the DxO version being a little bit superior is in areas of fairly dark details, in shadows. In the highlight areas there's probably not a massive amount of difference. Let's have a look at up here where the foliage is. It was fairly bright. There's not a massive difference. There's maybe, if you look really hard, there's a slight difference, but again not a lot to be worried about. It's fairly similar to Camera Raw or Lightroom rather, but certainly in the shadow areas it seems to be a little bit superior. So what are we going to conclude from all of these tests? It can be a little bit confusing looking at the different versions, but if I was to make an overall conclusion, I would say that Topaz Photo is no longer the champion of the denoise and sharpening area, and in particular Camera Raw and DxO Pure Raw are superior, particularly when it comes to bringing out details in shadow or darker areas. And another disadvantage, if you like, of using Topaz Photo is that you have to convert it in Lightroom to a TIFF file to take it into Topaz Photo, which means that then once you've done that denoise and sharpening, you can't go back and do any more of your raw file adjustments. So that's a little bit of a disadvantage. DxO, of course, you go into DxO from Lightroom, and it brings the file back as a digital negative file, which means that you still have your full raw editing capabilities, albeit with a much larger file size. It's about 2 to 3 times the size of your typical raw file. However, it's a superior way to carry out your editing. And I think overall the DxO Pure Raw has a slight edge in dealing with graininess and artifacts. But again, if you fiddle with the settings a little bit, you can eliminate some of the detail by going too hard on the denoising. So again, you've got to work with the software and learn its little foibles. So the fundamental question is it worth paying more over and above the cost of subscribing to Lightroom to buy one of these plugins? Well, I would think if you already have a version of DxO, the upgrade price of $75 I think is well worth it. And even buying it as a new piece of software for around $130, this is Australian dollars we're talking about, I still think it's a pretty good package. And of course you buy it and you own it, there's no more subscriptions to pay, so that's a plus. But then when you look at Topaz Photo, they've changed the way that you can purchase this software now. It's now part of the renamed Studio package, and so you do get a couple of extra features. You do get the super focus feature in Topaz Photo, and if you're buying the Studio package you also get Gigapixel, along with some other pieces of software that quite frankly at this stage I wouldn't consider using, but we may do down the track. And it's become a little bit more expensive. If you're an existing subscriber, you can renew the subscription for about $138. But if you're going to buy it all as a new user, it's going up to become quite a bit more expensive. So my advice would be, if you've already got current versions of Topaz Photo and Gigapixel, keep them. They won't get any further updates, but as they are, they work quite well. But if you're really looking for the ultimate in denoise and sharpening without any of the other enhancements, certainly DxO Pure Raw is a very worthy candidate. And of course, one thing not to forget is the special discount code for purchasing the software through Photo Tutor and the discount that is made available to us. It will be available for 15% off, provided at the checkout you use the code Photo Tutor, and I'll put the correct capitalization of that on the screen now so that you can use that to get your discounted version if you wish to go ahead and buy it. So thanks for watching. I hope that's all been useful, and I'll see you again soon.